to me, it's empowerment is, it has to be more than just setting direction. It needs to be, aligning on some big ideas, and then letting the people who are running with those ideas be empowered to make the decisions about how to execute them, how to implement them, and if they're not working, being able to call them off in a very rapid fashion so that we can then focus on other opportunities.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
When you empower your employees, you have a loyal base of employees that will give their all, that will run through walls for you. I know that sounds great, but I hear it over and over again when I talk to founders, CEOs, and the leaders within fast growth companies. Now, if you're listening to this, you probably already know the power of empowering others. But what are you missing? What are some of the key attributes or strategies and rituals that you can use to empower your team to go to that next level, to have that feeling of ownership? My guest today is the founder of Squadhelp. They create a community of people that will help you find the name for your next business or product or service line. Whatever it is, they can help you find the name. We're talking with Darpan Munjal. Darpan is a seasoned entrepreneur, and he's built this team. It's a small team at this point, but they're growing fast. And we talk about empowering employees and some of the rituals that they have that allow that to happen. Inside this episode, you'll find out how you can do it too. Now, here's the interview with Darpan. How are you, Darpan?
I'm doing great, Gene. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Excited to have you on the show to talk about leadership and growth. I have already let our audience know a little bit about you personally, but I'd love for you to tell us about Squadhelp. So how would you describe what Squadhelp does?
Yeah, thanks, Gene. Excited to be here. So Squadhelp is a crowdsourcing platform, and our main focus is to help companies come up with great names for their businesses or their brands. So the way it works is companies can launch naming competitions on our platform, and we have a community of about 200,000 people, and they provide ideas for names or taglines or even logo designs for those companies. Also, in the end, one person gets selected as the winner, and that's the name that the company walks away with for their business or their brand.
And anybody who's tried to name a company lately, it's kind of hard, especially if you want to get a .com extension with your company.
Exactly. It's just interesting that there is over 300 million .coms that have already been registered. So if you think about any single word in the dictionary, it's already taken. So now you have to be a lot more creative than people needed to be in the past to find a company name that is actually, still makes sense, easy to pronounce, easy to kind of spell. So, there's all those nuances that are kind of important. And our creative community kind of thinks along those lines to still help companies find a great name.
Well, that gives us context. You've grown really fast, making the Inc. list. Was that a goal or just something that happened because of the demand for your service?
It was never the goal. In fact, this whole business, to be honest, I never expected this to turn into a real business. I launched this as a experiment. So to me, it's more like an accidental startup. I was myself struggling to find a name for my own venture, and I thought it would be nice to have a resource which other entrepreneurs could use. So it grew organically for several years. In fact, I was focusing on other ventures during that time. Only in 2016 is when I jumped full-time into this, when I realized the full potential and the overall market that we are trying to kind of go after. So being in Inc. was never the goal. Our goal has always been to just innovate and disrupt this industry. And we've been fortunate to be featured in the Inc. 500 list for 2 years in a row now, and that's just a great testament to what we are building here and the community that we have that is helping our customers.
Well, I'd asked you a few weeks ago when we talked, just kind of getting an idea for what we would be doing this interview on. You only have about 8 employees. You got about 15 total if you count the contractors. So right. A small, close network family of people. Tell us a little bit about kind of the size of the company right now and how you work together.
Yeah, so it's a pretty small company. I mean, we are a bootstrap startup, and people play different roles. The core team that we have in our Chicago headquarters, they focus more around marketing and branding. Our technology team is partly based here, and then there's a couple of people who work remotely. So it's a fairly small, setup. Of course, we have a very large community, like I said, about 200,000 people who are providing ideas in these competitions. So we consider them as our extended team, and they're kind of helping, us become more successful by providing high quality ideas. But the team itself, it's a, we have built a fairly risk-taking culture, just because our goal has always been to innovate and continue to disrupt as much as we can, and that requires a lot of risk-taking, and that's what we focus on. um, um, it's not an expectation that everything that we will try will be successful. In fact, we expect a lot of the ideas that we are going to go after are actually going to fail, and that's okay.
Hold on for a second. Darpan talked about creating a risk-taking culture. Now, you may think that that is dangerous, but here's the flip side to having a culture that isn't a risk taker. If they are afraid to have their own decisions, if they're afraid to push forward, then they end up asking you everything, and you become the bottleneck of the business. And that is dangerous. You won't be able to scale past a certain level because everything must go through you. This is classical micromanagement. But when you understand that risk taking is necessary and you encourage that through rituals like we're talking about in this interview, you have something where people feel like risk taking is a part of the way we do business. Back to the interview. Well, let's talk about failure today, but I want to go through one of the things we talked about last week was around empowerment. Why is empowerment such an important piece to the company growing as fast as it has?
So, empowerment is always important, but in our case, when we are bootstrapped, I feel it's even more important, especially when we are trying to disrupt a otherwise very traditional industry. For us, we have to think outside the box every day. For us, it's important for us to, take risks by trying ideas that we understand that may or may not work. So unless the team is empowered, they will be second guessing themselves every day, and they'll be thinking really incrementally about how we can operationally improve the business, or maybe not push themselves as much. By empowering the team, we are able to really test some out of the box ideas, and that has really allowed us to grow that fast, because we have really changed the way companies think about naming and how they discover names. There's a lot of innovative things we have done in this business that you would not expect in such an industry, which is otherwise been dominated by very large agencies that work very traditionally.
I don't know if a specific example comes in mind where you maybe set direction for a team member or a specific team within the organization, and they were able to come up with ideas beyond what you were thinking about. Is something come to mind?
Yeah, so one example is, as a context, we have a lot of names in our platform. People have submitted over 6 million names. And, one challenge is, how do you discover great names? As a company, let's say you're launching a new clothing brand and you're looking for a modern name. You come to a platform which has, thousands of names. How do you find the right name for you? So what we started thinking about is, how about, we think about companies like, Netflix or Pandora or Spotify, how they recommend music or movies based on your taste and preferences. So this was one of the ideas that we were just playing around, and I challenged one of the team members to kind of run with it and kind of come back with something that we could really build upon. So that started this whole investment into AI, and we started building what's called a name genome, where we classify all the names and different attributes that helps us now to recommend names based on what somebody else is liking. So based on your tastes and preferences, we can recommend names to you that are very close to what you might be looking for. So this whole idea kind of started with brainstorming, how can we learn from companies in different industries what they are doing to make this discovery successful, and how do we apply to an industry like naming, which is like I said, has always been very traditional in the past.
Now, I gave you a part of my thoughts inside that question. But I want to go back to it. I work with clients who want to increase the level of ownership across the
Hmm.
company. And part of that is empowerment. That's the reason why we're talking today is
Yep.
when people feel ownership, they feel empowered. Um, I talked about the need for you to set direction. Is that the way it works for your company? Like, and I don't even mean like, this is even the goal, but what you just gave me is a great example. Do you believe in like just setting direction consistently for the team, being clear about that and letting them figure out the pieces
So
behind it?
I think there is a healthy balance. What we do is, in our case, we have what we call a big picture meeting. We talk about what are some of the big picture opportunities that we need to go after, and we align on those. And in that, it's not really more about setting direction. It's really about aligning on here are the top 5 things that we're going to focus on that we believe are going to set our business apart compared to what others are doing. And then, based on those big picture ideas, we turn those into some strategic initiatives, and that's what we go after. So, to me, it's empowerment is it has to be more than just setting direction. It needs to be aligning on some big ideas, and then letting the people who are running with those ideas be empowered to make the decisions about how to execute them, how to implement them, and if they're not working, being able to call them off in a very rapid fashion so that we can then focus on other opportunities.
You basically brought up another piece to what I see in ownership is inclusion. You're including
Yes,
your team into it. You can do that at your level. It
correct.
gets harder as you get 50, 100, 200 employees, but it's really a powerful strategy to make people feel this sense of ownership when you include them in setting those big goals, right? How you align around them.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing you bring up. To me, I look at this more than just our team. I feel inclusion needs to go beyond your own internal team. It also needs to include other constituents who play a critical role in making your company successful. In our case, we have this community of 200,000 people. I feel their ideas and including them in some of the decisions we are making is equally important. So what we have built is, we have a discussion forum where we engage with that community every day. Every single idea or the roadmap that we work on it comes from that community, as well as we are testing those ideas, we get real-time feedback from the community around whether or not that idea will work or how can we change that idea. So there is a lot of inclusion that we have in place, in addition to not only our own internal employees but also this virtual community of hundreds of thousands of people who are giving us that feedback every day.
I love that thought. I know we talked about failure in the beginning of this conversation. Um, any company that I feel has a need for innovation and disruption has a very healthy, optimistic relationship with failure. Tell us a little bit about where that comes, where you got that from.
So for us it is more important to recognize failure as soon as we can so that we can learn from it and then be successful. And there is actually an expectation that a lot of ideas that we will try will actually fail, and that's okay. So for us, what we do is almost weekly to talk about things that are working, things that are not working. And every month we actually have a meeting that is focused on killing ideas. As a startup, more than ideas that are focusing on all the products that we are working on, it's also important to recognize that we always will have trade-offs, and we'll always have to make some hard decisions about ideas that we need to stop just because they are not delivering what we expected them to deliver. So we actually have a formal meeting where we say, out of the 15 things that we're working on, these 5 things are just not giving us the outcome we wanted. So let's either change or kill those ideas, and let's figure out what did we learn from them so that we can then move to the next step in making a similar or some other idea work. I feel failure and making trade-offs and killing ideas, they all go hand in hand. But at the end of the day, the expectation has to be that all those things are okay. And more than just making sure every idea is successful, it's about getting the learnings from these failures and then applying them in a bigger fashion to the next thing that you're going to work on. And to me, that really helps us move forward as quickly as we are able to.
Hold on for a second. Darpan just talked about learning from failure. When you have conversations around what did we learn from today's failure or this week's failure, and you do that consistently, everyone realizes that failure is not a bad thing. You don't get fired for failure. They have a sense of psychological safety, which is very necessary for people to share their ideas and have that feeling of ownership. And the way you do that as a leader is you make it okay to fail. As long as you're doing it quickly, people are learning from it, and they're learning to manage the risk. They're not going, rogue outside the boundaries because they're clear about what the boundaries are. That's your job as a leader, to be able to set those boundaries with your team. Let's go back to the interview. You probably wouldn't be surprised when I say this, but a lot of fast-growing companies grow to a point where their level of focus is no longer, right? They used to be focused and they grew fast, but they have so many projects running. And we actually talk about this with some of my clients and prospects is, how do we take 30 ideas and get it down to 5 or 7? But you are starting early. Like, you have a small group of people and you have this monthly meeting. I'm kind of curious, do you have a name for that meeting, or is there?
Well, I mean, we actually call that a kill meeting. So basically it's a idea. Basically, we're gonna get together and focus on what are the things we're actually going to stop. So, that's really how we go into the meeting. Everybody brings their analysis around, what worked, what didn't work. And then we decide as a group, here are the things that we're going to end at this point, just because they're just not giving us the.
I love discovering little hidden counterintuitive ways, because everyone's having meetings about who's going to do this and who's going to do that. Yep. But having a specific meeting to talk about what are we going to stop doing, and having them bring their notes about let's killing it. I imagine this helps the company align together another way.
It does. And, sometimes it also can lead to a little bit of chaos, because if you started something and let's say, you announced a new feature and that it's not working well, but there are people out there, hundreds of thousands of people who have started using it. So killing things like that, if you're doing it too quickly and too rapidly, that can also lead to a bit of chaos. So we have to balance that a little bit. So while we, like to, stop things that are not working, our goal is always to test only part of the feature first, in a very small fashion, to see whether or not it has potential. And then we make a very rapid decision about whether or not to kill it. Because if you wait too long and then you have to kind of step back, it has implications beyond your own internal, company strategy. There are other stakeholders that are kind of, might be impacted. And so you have to be, cautious about those aspects as well.
Darpan, you've said this a number of times. I want to make sure we put a spotlight on it. Rapid decisions. A lot of companies are really getting at a point of they're getting strangled because so many decisions have to be made. They're not making them, and which is kind of a decision in itself. But you have part of your culture is making this rapid decision. How are you doing that consistently across with all the team?
Yeah, it's a good question. We are moving at 100 miles an hour. Our goal is to leapfrog, where we were in terms of features, in terms of where our competition is, and that can only happen if we can make rapid decisions. And sometimes those decisions are based on some very specific data that we have collected. In other times, we may not have the luxury of data. We may have only tested that a little bit. We may have only anecdotal feedback from people who we have tested it with. But at the same time, that's where the whole entire team is empowered to take all the data that they have. In some cases, it may be imperfect information, but make a decision, one way or the other, whether this idea is worth moving forward with, or do we need to make some changes, or do we need to stop this altogether? And we do that, we try to apply a lot of analytics into this. I mean, we use a lot of A/B testing and the feedback that we're collecting as a measure of whether or not something is working. But even if we don't have the data, the team is empowered to make those decisions as rapidly as possible, so that we don't keep going down a path which in our minds, we know that it's not going to work, even though we may not have all the data that we would have liked.
I really appreciate you being here, sharing your journey of taking Squadhelp to this Inc. list and building a culture around empowerment in this healthy relationship with failure, and talking about, creating quick decisions. So thanks for being here on the podcast.
Thank you, Gene. I appreciate it.
What a powerful episode. We talked about the rituals of empowering your employees. What are some of the things that you can do? What are some of the things you can think about as a leader if you want to increase the level of empowerment? There's a reason behind this empowerment, and it really comes back to having people feel like they're owners inside the company. That feeling of ownership is your job as a leader. But thanks for tuning in here. If you have anybody that you know that could use an episode like this, that wants to take their leadership to the next level, that wants to grow their company, wants to increase their culture, to really tune into empowerment or anything else, make sure that you tell them about Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.